This program is about unsolved mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual family members and police officials have participated in recreating the events. What you are about to see is not a news broadcast.
In 1977, outside Tucson, Arizona, a businessman was found shot in the back of the head. 13 years later, a computer draftsman died in a similar manner in Phoenix. The only possible link between the two men was Don Devereaux, a freelance journalist who now believes the second bullet was meant for him. In Rochester, New York, a brazen gang of thieves made off with nearly $11 million in a daring daylight robbery. Perhaps you can help authorities identify three possible suspects. Martha Brown and her twin brother Bobby spent their formative years in foster homes. But when the twins were 6, the authorities decided to separate them, and Martha embarked on a search which has now spanned more than 3 decades. Also tonight, an important update. Thanks to our viewers, an alleged drunk driver wanted in the highway deaths of an elderly couple is now in custody. Join me for another edition of Unsolved Mysteries. May 14, 1990. In Phoenix, Arizona, Doug Johnston, a computer draftsman, was found slumped on the front seat of his car. He had been shot once behind the left ear from a distance of at least 12 inches. 13 years earlier, June 18, 1977, the body of businessman Charles Morgan was found in the Arizona desert 40 miles southwest of Tucson. He had been shot once in the back of the head. Ironically, he was wearing a bulletproof vest. 2 suspicious deaths with no apparent connection, except that the authorities continue to hold with the unlikely possibility that both men committed suicide. Many disagree, citing in particular the case of Charles Morgan.
It is not a very normal place to shoot oneself as a suicide. And bear in mind, he's wearing a bulletproof vest at the time. I've never seen in all my years as a journalist a fella take himself out in the desert wearing a bulletproof vest and shoot himself in the back of the head.
On a previous broadcast, Don Devereaux was a key interview in our segment about the Charles Morgan case. Devereaux was convinced that the deaths of Morgan and Doug Johnston were not suicides, not random killings. Devereaux believes both men were murdered and that both were targets of a contract hit. Now, in a dramatic twist, Don Devereaux has been warned that the bullet which killed Doug Johnston was meant for him.
Well, the sales agreement looks all in order. The legal description...
The complex saga began 15 years ago in Tucson, Arizona. On March 22, 1977, Charles Morgan, a devoted husband and father, disappeared, apparently abducted on the way to his escrow company. 3 days later, he returned home just as suddenly at 2 in the morning. He was staggering, weak, and unable to talk.
Hallucinogenic?
Morgan wrote notes to his wife, telling her an hallucinogenic drug had been painted on the back of his throat.
I'm gonna call the police.
He was afraid the dosage was lethal. Morgan wrote that if his wife tried to contact the police or even a physician, the entire family would be killed. For a week, Morgan's wife fed him with an eyedropper. He still could not speak, but began to allude to the fact that he was secretly working for the federal government. He wrote that his abductors had taken his Treasury ID. On June 7, 1977, Charles Morgan vanished again. 11 days later, his body was found.
Yes? Mrs. Ruth Morgan?
Yes.
I'm Chef
3 weeks later,
Jack
two
Richard,
men
first
claiming to be
class
government
ladies,
officials showed up at Morgan's home. While his widow stood helplessly by, the two men ransacked the house. No one knows what they were looking for or what they found. The case remained mired in mystery until our broadcast. More than 600 calls came into the telecenter. Don Devereaux investigated every lead. What he learned was staggering.
Morgan, it turns out, was extensively involved in money laundering activities through his escrow company in Tucson. We also ascertained that he was doing large transactions in gold and platinum, anywhere from weekly to monthly, for the several years between 1973 and when he was killed in 1977. He was doing well in excess of $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion a year in gold alone over that period, well in excess. And that much of it, in fact, seems to have been coming out of Southeast Asia at the end of the Vietnam War.
Charles Morgan.
A lot of people seem to have been involved, including renegade folks from the U.S. intelligence community, some CIA people who were doing stuff perhaps under cover of the agency, but probably most likely to line their own pockets. Also some indication that Vietnamese government officials that were going into exile were involved. People from the Department of Defense probably were involved, again, in a renegade rather than an official capacity.
Devereaux has discovered that Charles Morgan kept a set of duplicate records of all the illicit transactions. Evidently, Morgan thought the duplicates would be his life insurance policy. Instead, they became his death warrant.
He was clearly on the run the last few months of his life, literally on the run the last 10 days of his life, and nevertheless, somebody caught up with him.
Don Devereaux was convinced that Charles Morgan was killed because he knew too much. Somebody wanted Morgan silenced forever. It seemed an isolated incident, and 3 months after the Unsolved Mysteries broadcast, and 13 years after Charles Morgan died, another unusual death occurred, right across the street from Don Devereaux's home in Phoenix.
What time are you to be home?
9:30. See you then.
On May 14, 1990, at 11 p.m., Doug Johnston left for work as usual. He was assigned to the night shift at a local computer graphics company.
Hi, John. Hi. You were the first one on the scene?
An hour later, Doug Johnston was found dead in the company parking lot. He had been shot once behind his left ear from a distance of at least 12 inches.
Shell casing.
At first glance, it appeared to be suicide. Yet oddly, Johnston was right-handed. In addition, there was no gun found at the scene, and there was no powder residue on Johnston's hands.
As far as evidence, the only thing we found was a .25 caliber bullet casing. We did not find a weapon that fired that bullet. Our medical examiner determined that it was just as likely that the gunshot wound to the head could have been self-inflicted as it was as likely that another person had done that. So based on that, we can't classify it either a murder or a suicide, and it's being maintained in our homicide files.
Doug would never commit suicide. He had just finished a year of computer-aided drafting. He graduated with honors. He was on his way up there. And when he graduated in March, got the job in April, everything was going really great. We had a future starting all over again for us. And there's no way he would have committed suicide.
Don Devereaux followed the investigation with great interest. He lived across the street from the parking lot where Doug Johnston had been killed. Johnston's car was an aging Toyota station wagon, very much like Devereaux's.
I contacted Phoenix PD within a few days of the Johnston shooting and told them that I was across the street, had a similar car, and was in fact working on a homicide case and some stuff that also involved some other substantial criminal activity at the time that Johnston was killed. The initial read I got from Phoenix PD was one of not really thinking that that had any bearing on the Johnston shooting. And so although I continued to track it for a while, over a period of time, I just sort of put it out of my mind.
The year after Doug Johnston was shot, Don Devereaux was contacted by a writer from Washington, D.C. named Dan Casolaro. Devereaux agreed to share the information he had uncovered concerning Charles Morgan's illegal gold transactions. But before Devereaux could even mail his research, Dan Casolaro was dead. Casolaro was found in a hotel room with his wrist slashed deeply a dozen times. Police ruled the death a suicide, but to Don Devereaux and others, it seemed far more sinister.
Dan Casolaro's brother is a doctor. The doctor tells us that Dan Casolaro was so squeamish that he was reluctant to allow his brother to prick his finger to do any kind of blood sample work on Dan over the years. I mean, that's squeamish about blood. Of all the ways that Dan Casolaro might have committed suicide, had he chosen to commit suicide, slashing his wrists a dozen times in a bathtub and dying in that manner seems to me the least likely of anything he could possibly have done.
These guys don't offer much. They don't volunteer information.
6 months after Dan Casolaro's death, Devereaux had a shocking conversation with another journalist who said he had a warning from a highly placed source in the CIA.
And the word I got back was that they did think they were getting you when they got that guy.
It was a botch job?
Yes. And these are the exact words. There have been, and there still are, contracts out to kill you.
Plural?
Well, that means contracts had been out there in the past.
It's a shocker when somebody calls you up and says, you're about to be killed.
Well, that doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow.
My colleague told me that looked like I had a problem, that he understood from his CIA contact that whatever it was, it involved something I was looking at that had both CIA and organized crime dimensions, and that I could be in some real trouble, and to get my head down, maybe even get out of there for a while until he could figure out what was happening.
It's on the street. People know that somebody's after you.
Later,
Finally,
two
you
other
have shaved my
sources,
beard and
one
all
from the
that.
CIA and one from Israeli intelligence, confirmed the death threats.
It's just those guys I've got the problem with.
Has Don Devereaux been targeted for murder because of his investigation into the Charles Morgan case? If so, then Doug Johnston may very well have been the innocent victim of a contract hit meant for Devereaux himself.
His parking lot is right across the street from my parking lot. There's a one-digit difference in our numbers. I've gotten mail fairly frequently for the building across the street. He was driving a car much like my car. Somebody evidently was waiting for him in the dark. Must have known about where he would be pulling in and parking. And this was not just some random shooting. This was a shooting that had all the characteristics of a very professional killing. This was a single shot, 25 caliber, back of the left ear, very slick murder. I can't say for an absolute fact what happened to him. I wasn't there. I can simply say that on the basis of what I'm looking at and hearing, I think the odds on him having taken his own life are virtually non-existent. If Johnson was killed with a bullet that was intended for me, I feel terrible about it. And I feel very awful for his wife and family.
There's so much evidence that these people were after Don instead of my husband. It wasn't a gang-related shooting or suicide or anything, and it all kind of fits together that they were after Don, and my husband just happened to be in the wrong place.
30-some metric tons a deal, that's $100 million deals. That's an awful lot of stuff. I suspect that the same network of people, mob people, intelligence community people that were involved in a lot of this 1970s activities that we're focusing on in terms of bullion, are probably still out there. I am not thrilled to think that there could be, quote, a high-level CIA official, close quote, who knows about this, who is not himself taking official actions to correct it. And clearly, if there are people in the U.S. government who know and disapprove of this sort of thing, then they damn well should get off their butts and do something about it.
For those unfamiliar with the details, some of Don Devereaux's conspiracy theories about the mob Renegade CIA agents, smuggled gold, and contract hits may seem far-fetched. But the fact remains that Don Devereaux has tape recordings of a number of credible sources who warned him that he is the next target. In 1979, John Constable and his wife Virginia retired to Davenport, Florida. On March 3, 1991, the couple left their home to visit their only daughter, Linda, who lived in Jacksonville, 200 miles north. That same morning, 12 miles away, a man named James White got behind the wheel of his pickup truck. White, a house painter and handyman, had a long history of drunk driving arrests. John Constable was pronounced dead at the scene. His wife, Virginia, died an hour later from massive internal injuries.
The Florida Highway Patrol officer said that there had been an automobile accident and there was a fatality. I just remember asking which one. I never dreamed it would have been both of them.
James White was transported to a nearby hospital. He suffered a fractured jaw, a broken ankle, and 3 broken ribs. Tests later revealed that at the time of the crash, White's blood alcohol content was twice Florida's legal limit. James White was eventually charged with 2 counts of DUI manslaughter and 1 count of driving under the influence. But just 3 days after the crash, White, assisted by his relatives, left the hospital and disappeared. His whereabouts remained a mystery until the night of our broadcast. Update: Burlington, Vermont. James White has been arrested.
Following the broadcast of Unsolved Mystery, we received some 200 phone calls about James White and his whereabouts. 2 days after the Unsolved Mysteries broadcast, we got the phone call we were waiting on. James White was spotted by someone who had seen the program up in Burlington, Vermont. He was seen in a bar, and he was arrested and taken into custody up there.
I was very glad to get him off the road, to think that he's not going to kill someone else. I think it's a terrible thing what he did. He should have stayed there, and he should have faced the music.
Where did he come from?
2 weeks after he was captured, James White was returned to Florida, where he is scheduled to stand trial on all charges. White, who has 2 prior convictions for drunk driving, could receive a maximum sentence of 30 years in prison. Rochester, New York, June 26, 1990. At around 6:45 a.m., Armored Motor Services of America dispatched a transport for a scheduled delivery. Inside the truck was nearly $11 million in various denominations. The events you are about to see are based on an official police investigation. Just after 7 a.m., the armored truck made an unauthorized but not uncommon stop at a convenience store. A guard, whom we will call Mary Wilson, went inside the store while the driver, Albert Ranieri, waited in the truck.
We stop there about once or twice a week and usually get about the same thing. And that morning, there was no one in there when I walked in. It was just me, and then a lady came in later on. And it was normal.
While Mary Wilson was buying donuts and coffee, a daring assault was unfolding in full view just 100 feet away.
Put your hands on the wheel! Look straight ahead! We'll all get home tonight.
Don't move.
move or I'll kill you. Don't turn around.
Five minutes later, Mary Wilson returned to the truck, unaware that her partner was no longer in control.
Okay, here's your sandwich.
No! Get down on the ground.
What happened so fast, I didn't really get a chance to get scared. He pushed me to the floor and tied my hands and my feet together with plastic handcuffs.
When I say drive, you drive. When I say turn, you turn.
Albert Ranieri was forced at gunpoint to drive to a secluded location 1.5 miles from the convenience store. The armored truck was followed by a gray Chevrolet van.
One couldn't have picked a better location. It was about 75 to 100 yards off the road, and it completely disappears from sight behind a small hill. And we know that the site had been prepared prior to the robbery. There are several tree branches that had been freshly cut to make sure that this large vehicle would fit.
All right, get back here. Crawl through that window. Okay, just take it. Shut up! Don't talk to me! Crawl through that window, I'll kill you.
Authorities believe that the two robbers were met at the location by at least one other accomplice. Albert Ranieri was bound and gagged and forced on top of Mary Wilson.
At that point in time, the vehicle is unloaded, and there's approximately 2,000 pounds of money there. One tray in particular was full of $100 bills. There was $1 million in hundreds. There was almost $8 million in 20s, and the rest was in a variety of other denominations.
According to Wilson and Ranieri, there was little dialogue between the robbers. The money was transferred with brisk efficiency.
This was a lot of money, so we believe that it took probably in the neighborhood of 5, maybe 10 minutes to offload that amount of bulk.
I sat there quiet, made sure I didn't hear any more voices. I was scared for my life. I kept thinking about my son, and I just thought I was going to die. That's why I broke loose, because I wasn't going to sit there and wait for somebody to come back and kill me.
It took Mary Wilson 15 painful minutes to rip through the plastic handcuffs. Unable to free her partner from his restraints, she drove the armored truck to company headquarters and reported the robbery. In less than an hour, the thieves had made off with nearly $11 million. The next day, the getaway van was discovered 5 miles away. The interior was littered with over $13,000 in small bills, the leftovers of what authorities have determined is the largest on-the-road armored car robbery in United States history. Everything seemed to indicate that the heist was an inside job. A conveniently broken porthole allowed one robber to hold the driver at gunpoint, while the other allegedly used a key to gain entry through the truck's side door. Both gunmen wore clothing which was nearly identical to the uniforms worn by company employees. Finally, only a limited number of people were aware of the enormous amount of untraceable cash being transported that day. When we return, a woman needs your help to find her long-lost twin brother. The Dust Bowl, one of the most devastating natural disasters in American history. During the 1930s, years of relentless drought transformed the lush farmlands of Oklahoma, Texas, and the Midwest into a barren wasteland. Thousands of families were forced to abandon their ancestral homes, desperately searching for work. Uprooted and impoverished, many made their way west to California's fertile San Joaquin Valley. 15 years later, many still remained in the area as migrant farm workers, following the fruit and vegetable harvest from town to town. Ira and Dora Brown were typical Dust Bowl refugees. They had lost their farm in Oklahoma and never returned. By 1951, they had 4 children, and Dora was pregnant again. On July 27, 1951, Dora Brown gave birth to twins, a girl and a boy. The children were named Martha and Robert. With 6 mouths to feed, the Browns felt they had no choice but to put the twins up for adoption.
I think my parents gave me up out of their best interests, and they really couldn't afford us. I had a heart condition. I think my father finally reluctantly gave us up for adoption so I could get good medical treatment and get an education.
Martha and Bobby were placed in California's foster care system. They were shuttled from one family to another, never knowing what it was like to live in a secure home. Finally, in 1956, when they were 5 years old, Martha and Bobby came to live with Alice and Arnold Breitler in Reedley, California.
My name is Alice, and this is Arnold, and we're very happy to have you here. And in the house, we have some presents for you. Would you like to go inside and see them? All right, let's do that. Come on.
I can see Martha and Bobby as they came to my door. They were so pretty and so cute, my first time to see them. And I really fell in love with them right away.
And this is your room, and there's your doll, and there's your truck.
Martha went right to the bedroom and grabbed the doll and just hugged it. And I thought that was very sweet of her. I didn't at the time realize that they hadn't had toys before.
One more brush, is that okay?
The social worker told us that they had been mistreated. And it took me 2.5 hours to get the dirt off of their bodies.
Look at your ear. Martha, don't eat with your fingers, honey. Honey, don't eat with your fingers. Eat with your fork. That's
They were so hungry,
Bobby?
and they just ate for a week. It seemed like we couldn't fill them up.
You are a hungry boy.
As time went by, Martha would tell me things that the home that they had been in, a foster home, that they had to stand on the outside while the family ate their dinner. And then they would bring them in and give them beans.
We were hungry when we got to the Breitlers, very malnourished. I have memories of Bobby and I going to the kitchen and sneaking out what food we could find. And it seemed to be a nightly ritual. We were so afraid of going hungry again. Bobby and I were very close to each other at that time. It was like we were the only kids in the whole world that loved each other, and nobody else loved us.
Years of severe neglect had taken a tremendous emotional toll on the twins, especially Bobby. Almost immediately, there was evidence of serious behavioral problems.
one day they were playing out there in the backyard. I went out, and here Bobby was holding Martha's face right down in the water, and he wouldn't let her up.
Bobby, stop that. Don't do that. Bobby, you're hurting Martha. You mustn't do that.
I think Bobby loved his sister very much, but he also resented her.
Go to your room. Right this minute. Now you go to your room.
He'd be real sweet, and then he'd build himself up into these little fits like. And then they'd pass away, and then he'd be sweet again. And it seemed to be something in him.
Bobby's violent temper was a constant worry for both the Breitlers and the Child Welfare Office. In 1957, the Welfare Board, fearing for Martha's safety, decided it would be best to separate the twins. Bobby was sent to yet another foster home.
I remember very well the day my twin brother left. We were sitting out on the steps, and I didn't know he was gonna leave, and I don't know if he knew he was gonna leave.
Now be a good boy, Bobby. I'm gonna miss you. Give me a hug. Now, say goodbye to your sister.
And at the last minute, Bobby gave me his clown outfit that we had wore that Halloween.
Really?
And that was the one thing he could give me that was very special to him. I miss my twin very, very much because it seemed like he was the only person in the whole world that really loved me. And he was the only person in the whole world that I loved. So when he left, I really missed him.
I felt so bad, and even to this day, I feel like I wish I hadn't sent him away. But, I mean, I'm sorry that they had me send him away.
When the twins were 11, Bobby and his foster family moved out of the area. Martha and the Breitlers never heard from him again. In 1962, Martha was legally adopted by the Breitlers. After the death of her adoptive father, she and her mother moved to Ashland, Oregon. But Martha never forgot her twin brother. When she was 18, Martha made a special trip to the welfare office in Fresno, California. She learned that Bobby had been adopted and eventually obtained his address.
I wrote my twin brother to ask him if he could come to my high school graduation. And I remember waiting excitedly each day for the postman to bring me a letter from him.
A few weeks later, Martha's letter was returned, unopened.
I think I thought at that time that I had lost my twin for good, that I would never be able to find him again.
20 years would pass before Martha was able to uncover any additional information about her brother. In 1989, Martha obtained copies of Bobby's birth certificate and driver's license. She also found that he had an address in Los Angeles.
I was so excited. I was jumping up and down and clapping and yelling and the whole bit.
What Martha did not realize was that the address belonged to a shelter for the homeless. But according to the records of the Midnight Mission, Bobby had not been seen there for more than 2 years.
I think my twin brother and I, while we were little, had a special bond. I still think he, in his own little way, still remembers me and loves me as he did when I was a child. It's just very important for me to find him. It would mean the world to me if I could find him.
Next, a murder investigation is complicated by the victim's religious beliefs. America's God's crucible, the great melting pot. These words, written nearly a century ago, are as true today as they were during the great European migration. However, woven into the colorful fabric of American society, a few subcultures are so self-contained and tradition-bound that they are shrouded in mystery for those in the mainstream and are all too often misunderstood. Orthodox Jews comprise only about 0.1% of our population. Their roots may be traced back 5,000 years to the time of Moses. Observant Orthodox Jews live according to strict codes of social and moral conduct which have remained unchanged for centuries. Hours of daily prayer and a rigid dietary regime are among the ancient rituals which guide the Orthodox Jew through birth, marriage, and death. To ensure the continuation of the tradition, many communities have established yeshivas, schools which include an emphasis on the religious and ethical principles of Orthodox Judaism.
So did God.
On Saturday, November 1st, 1986, Don Daly, a veteran Nassau County, New York police detective, was unexpectedly thrust into this uncommon environment. At 8 a.m., Daly was dispatched to a yeshiva in Long Beach, New York, to investigate the murder of one of its students. The victim was 15-year-old Chaim Weiss of New York City. A single blow to his skull with a sharp object had severed his spinal column.
Rusty, would you lie me, please?
Sure, Doc.
Investigators found no murder weapon. There was no evidence of a robbery or signs of a struggle. Almost immediately, Detective Daly realized that this would be a unique investigation, unlike any other in his 25-year career.
Well, I think initially we were dealing with a Saturday, which is a Sabbath. When we arrived at the scene sometime around 8 o'clock in the morning, it was difficult to talk to anybody at that particular time because, number one, the people we're dealing with, being Orthodox Jews, they're not able to write. We couldn't take statements from anybody. We got the impression a lot of the students at that time were afraid to talk to us or a little shy. Could you bring that door?
In the victim's room, Daly found a series of clues which indicated that the killer might have been familiar with the yeshiva and the customs of Orthodox Judaism. It appeared that Chaim had been killed as he slept. His body was then moved, not once, but twice. First from the bed to the floor, and later to another spot 2 feet away. It also seemed strange that Chaim's window had been left wide open on a chilly October evening.
We've spoken to several people about this who are involved in the Orthodox religion. It would be customary in the religion to open a window or a door where the dead person would be to let the spirit out. It would also be customary for the body to be taken off the bed because the body should be at the lowest point and the coolest point being the floor compared to the bed.
Another ritual would result in a third peculiarity. One of the rabbis asked to leave a memorial candle in the room, which would burn for 7 days. The crime scene was then sealed. However, 2 days later, another candle mysteriously appeared. No one in the school ever admitted to having placed it in the room.
If they lit that candle as a gesture of sympathy or love for Chaim, why wouldn't they come forward and say that? That's certainly a good thing to do. Nobody came forward with that.
With little else to go on, Detective Daly set about piecing together the final hours of Chaim Weiss's life. He learned that Chaim was an outgoing, likable teenager who was at the top of his class. He had been attending the yeshiva in Long Beach for 2.5 years.
Chaim was loving, joyous, bright. As far as I know, at the yeshiva, Chaim had no problems that I can think of. He felt comfortable. maybe there was some things going on which is normal among kids.
Now go, students, go. Good Shabbos to you. Don't forget, it's Halloween.
In 1986, Halloween fell on a Friday night, the beginning of the Jewish Sabbath. In the late afternoon, Chaim left class with his friends to attend services. Afterwards, he would return to the dormitory. Several hours later, two classmates saw Chaim reading in the hallway.
Many of the students do that because of their religion. They don't put lights on and off at that time. On the Sabbath, it was dark, so the lights are left on in the main hallway. The students sit out in the hallway and read.
Chaim Weiss was last seen alive at 1 a.m. Police speculate that the killer might have known the layout of the dormitory and was probably aware that Chaim was one of only two students without a roommate.
If somebody came up through that stairwell, those rooms were all occupied by students. Nobody heard anything unusual, no yelling or screaming. However, we did have one student who felt that he heard his door open up sometime during the night and then close again, but he assumed it was his roommate. There are a lot of questions that we haven't been able to answer. We have some things that we have to put behind us here.
A few days after the murder, Detective Daly called a meeting with the students, teachers, and rabbis. Daly was desperate for information and implored them to come forward.
But if anybody knows anything, we need the help.
But almost every question he asked was answered by stony silence.
Do you fellas really, do you understand how important this is? We learned at one point that in their particular Orthodox religion, unless you have proof or another witness, mere suspicion alone is not enough to go and say anything or to accuse somebody. So they wouldn't talk about other students or who they might suspect or what their feelings were because they didn't want to put any blame on anyone without more than mere suspicion.
Do you know for sure who killed Chaim Weiss?
No.
Police eventually polygraphed 40 students and several of the school's teachers and rabbis.
Did you kill Chaim Weiss?
God forbid.
Just answer with a yes or no answer, please.
No.
However, Detective Daly obtained no useful information from the polygraph exams. It seemed as if he would never find a suspect or a motive.
No. We'd like to see anybody with any information at all. Whether at that time they didn't want to tell us because it was mere suspicion, maybe they have a different feeling now, and maybe mere suspicion would be helpful to us and give us those suspicions so we can go out and investigate them.
The not knowing makes it much more difficult for me to cope. Certain things I accept. My son's dead, but the murderer is still loose. All these unanswered questions makes me feel very, very uneasy.
One question above all others continues to haunt this case. Why would anyone brutally murder a 15-year-old boy with no known enemies? Police have uncovered only one significant clue. A jogger has stated that he saw a young man who could have been a yeshiva student a few blocks from the school at 7 a.m. on the day Chaim's body was found. All attempts to identify the student have been unsuccessful. Join me next time. Perhaps you may be able to help solve a mystery.
Thank you.